So Adrian, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you went through your playing career and then merged into coaching.
Well, I came out of school in '96, went undrafted, and spent 3 years in the CBA, worked my way up. Finally got a shot with the Celtics in '99. Went on to play 9 years in the league, various teams, moved around Chicago, Houston, Dallas, to name a few. Retired in 2008. That word of retire is always funny because it's just, they don't know, they no longer need your services. Like, I'm not retiring, like Michael Jordan retired. But a guy like me, you want to fight as long as you can to keep a job. But unfortunately, in 2008, I was released. And the head coach at the time was Scott Skiles. And he called me and said, "Hey, I got some bad news, but also want to offer you a job, a position on my staff." And I literally went from playing to coaching the very next day. So it's all a bittersweet experience. And so this is my 12th year in the league coaching and my 21st overall in the NBA.
What was it like going literally, as you said, overnight from having a player mentality of, fighting to keep your place on a roster versus now I'm semi in charge of players?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me was to convey to the players that I'm taking my job serious. All these guys I went in the training camp with for 30 plus days, and you get to know them very well. And all of a sudden now you're on the other side, and sometimes they want to keep interacting with you as a player to player per se. But I made a point that I didn't want to joke around in especially that first year. And after practice, I would shoot the breeze with them. But before and during practice, I wanted to just maintain some seriousness about myself, just to let them know that I'm taking this craft serious, and it seemed to work out. The players really respected me, and toward the end of my career anyway, I was gravitating toward where I was helping players, helping the young rookies. So it wasn't anything new, but having that formal position put on you. I think a lot of former players, sometimes they get caught in the middle where one minute they're hanging with the boys, and next minute now you're trying to coach them, and it doesn't work. Yeah, I think you just have to be consistent with your approach.
And what skills do you think as a player allowed you to transition into coaching, and what skills did you find maybe you didn't have when you moved into that position?
I think the biggest thing, trait that you have as a former player is that the relatability. You can really empathize with a player. You know what that player is going through.
You've been there.
You've been there. You know what that player is feeling, and you can connect with that player. Again, playing and coaching is totally two different things. So being a coach now, my playing experience helps me to bridge the gap, but my coaching experience helps me to move the needle per se. A lot of people think that because you played the game, you can coach the game, which history has shown that's not always the case. And very seldom is the case. You see a lot of times in the past where a player will retire and all of a sudden he's a head coach. And for me, it's no surprise that he may struggle because it's so much that goes into coaching. I think the number one thing that I realized was that you have to be a good teacher. And I believe that all great coaches are great teachers. And how do you communicate? How do you get that person to pick up on what you're putting down? How do you build the trust? How do players learn? You don't learn this stuff as a player. And I was fortunate to be under really good coaches that were exceptional teachers: Scott Skiles, Tom Thibodeau, Billy Donovan, and then here with Nick Nurse. So I've been fortunate under that in that sense.
So you basically had a mentor as a head coach who you could rely on to give you some of that content. Um, if I transition now to more as life as a coach, I told my kids yesterday, hey, I'm talking to an NBA coach tomorrow. What would you ask them? And one of the questions they said was, well, you travel a lot, right? You're always on the road, especially during the season. How do you're a dad, you're a husband, how do you balance that kind of lifestyle with being a husband and a parent? What do you do? What strategies do you have?
I mean, that's an excellent question. A lot of research now is being geared to coach mental health and well-being. I think I've shared with you that I'm getting closer to choosing a dissertation, and I'm gravitating on coach well-being, how coaches deal with stress, because it's a real thing, as you know. In the NBA, it's the pressure to win, succeed, the pressure to develop players, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's a lot of pressures on the coach to perform. And research is showing that coaches are performers in their own right, and the better we perform as coaches, the better we'll be able to teach and relate and grow our players. So it, something that I've struggled in the past with, especially the more responsibility that you have on your plate. The last couple of years, I've been in charge of the defense. Now, the defense is a total team effort, but I'm kind of like overseeing the defense, where I have to do the drills and pull the clips and make sure that we're all on the same page with that. And it's a lot of hours. It's a lot of long nights. In the NBA season, you're traveling from city to city. Your eating habits are terrible. We eat at 11, 12 o'clock at night after games. So it's not set up to be beneficial for good living. But you learn ways to monitor yourself and manage it. You have to learn how to manage your stress. I'll give you an example. Our head coach, Nick Nurse, he's just huge. He's big into music. He plays the piano, plays the guitar, and all this helps him to relieve some of the stress, to get his mind off of basketball. And I think it's an important lesson for a lot of young coaches who just want to dive right in, and basketball becomes your life. But it's more to life than sports. And you have to, especially if you have family, you have to find ways to be creative, to release some of that stress. A lot of coaches go for a walk. Some coaches spend time with their family. Some coaches like to just detox. And, I do yoga with my wife almost every day. So you learn ways to relieve the stress and how to deal with the stress, because it is a real issue.
All right, that's great. Now, when you are coaching, you've obviously got you're working with a lot of professionals, and some of them may be considered more prominent than others. So you have some that are quote unquote superstars who may be getting the big checks, but then you've also got a group of players who may be coming straight out of college or from Europe, who are not well known, don't have the big contracts, maybe spending a lot of time on the bench. Mm-hmm. Are there any strategies or ways that you work so that everybody's on the same page and they're all working together, as opposed to the fractions that can occur between players who perceive themselves to be not as significant versus players who consider themselves maybe entitled?
Well, number one, we do know there's a difference from your all-star players and your role players, and every team is going to be like that. But what you try to do is just be as fair as possible with them. Are all players created equal? Not at all. Like I played with Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash. Those guys were far ahead of me but what I did respect them as teammates and the coaching staff, that they respected the role that I had. And I think it's so important that the coaches relate to the players, that the role is important. It may not be a favorable role to you. You may not enjoy it. But it is important for the team to succeed. I think that's number one. I think
teaching kind of the role players to kind of buy into their role.
Buy into their roles, and just like the star players, they got to buy into their roles. They have a lot of responsibility and pressures to produce every night. It's not easy to average 20 in the NBA, and I'll tell you firsthand. So sometimes these guys look like it's easy. The LeBrons and the Kobe's and the MJ's. It's very difficult to go out there every night and produce to the type of level that they do. So they deserve everything that is coming with them. So everyone has their role. I think the other thing is that you want to create a culture of just inclusion. Like Coach Nurse, he's done an unbelievable job of just building our culture. So what we do as a coaching staff is we rotate players every 9-10 games. Instead of us grabbing one player and say, he's my guy, I'm working with him and you can't talk to him. And sometimes the coaches can get so possessive with that. And I think what that does is it kind of snuffs out the camaraderie that a team needs to succeed. So for the first 9 or 10 games, I might watch film of Kyle Lowry and Pascal. And then the next go around, I might have Rondé and OG. And so we keep rotating so everyone gets a feel of each other so that at any time during the season, I'm going to feel comfortable giving feedback, because that's what it's all about. It's about building a culture of feedback where I can say, hey, you might want to think about doing this a little differently. And that player is going to be receptive. But if that relationship isn't there, it's going to be very difficult to communicate in that form. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned, just winning a championship, is just all the factors that you got to put in place to win and succeed. There's a lot of things behind the door, the closed doors, that you got to get right to win.
Yeah, and talking about winning, a lot of people, they'll have watched the Raptors win, right? And it was great to watch and exciting. And they don't see all of the work going on behind the scenes. It's not just coaching the plays or watching film. There's a lot of other people involved to help to make this work together, and that requires some really good communication skills and teamwork. Can you talk a little bit about what other roles there are in an organization like yours and how you all work together?
Well, we have player development coaches who, bless their heart, it's not an easy job. They're on the floor with the players before practice, after practice, and then they're coming back in the evenings if players want to do any extra shooting or night shooting. They're responsible for getting that player from point A to point B. And like I said before, there's a lot of pressures to develop these players. The front office does a lot of the groundwork, a lot of the make the tough decisions of drafting a certain player, and then they hand it off to the coaches, and we have to make it work. And Jim Sand is one of the guys who's in our player development, who oversees our player development. He does a phenomenal job. He's been in the NBA over 30 years. And the one thing that's really interesting about that position, historically, they give the player development position to someone who has minimal years of coaching experience.
Really?
It could be a former player. It could be someone coming into the coaching profession, and that's where they start out. But it's one of the most important coaching positions. And I think the reason why we succeed is because we have a guy that has over 30 years of developing talent, and he knows what he's doing. And I think that gives us a competitive advantage. So you're always looking for ways, like the why behind, you kind of question, okay, why is it this way? And one thing that we have under, Masai and our whole management, starting and with Coach Nurse, is, it's very open, very creative mentality. We always try to get out the norm. You know, like Coach Nurse with the boxing one in the finals. You know, he never even spoke about the boxing one, but we were down in game 2, almost 20 points. He put the boxing one on Curry, and we almost come back and win it. It's just thinking out the box and not just doing everything that everyone else is doing, just trying to think a little differently.
Yeah, and my point of asking the question is because a lot of people may just assume that, well, I want to be a coach, and so I have to be a Coach Griffin or a Coach Nurse.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of roles within the coaching
Sure.
profession, and just basketball, where you can have a full-time position and a very successful one, but you may not be the person who's calling the plays, so to speak.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you say that because I got to coach the Rising Star All-Star game this season because we had the best record. That was the very first time in some years that I actually got to coach, where I was drawing plays, calling timeouts, doing substitutions and whatnot, where it all fell on me. Most of the time as assistant coaches, you know, you have to play your role. And you know, as player development coaches, analytical coaches, offense, defense, special teams, late game. A lot of coaches have a role that they have to bring to the table each day. And it's not always glitz and glamour. You know, everyone sees us on game days, but it's a lot of work. You know, for me, I'm after a game is over, I have to get ready for the next day. And so I have to watch our game, break down the film. And when you're breaking down the film to show to the team, you want to try to tell a story. You know, you're not just saying, okay, we did this, we did that. You want to put some type of creativity to it where you keep the players engaged. You know, I might show 3 or 4 possessions where our ball pressure was very poor, and then I'll come back and show a couple where we did an exceptional good job. And then you can see how the players are more engaged, and you always honing your craft. You know, I always believe in being I'm very positive with my when I'm trying to give feedback, and then be a teacher when I have to. When I mean, as far as being a teacher, like I'm not going to yell, I'm not screaming. I want you to focus on getting better. I always tell my players, like, watch the film, make your correction on the film, make your correction on the floor, because that's how you get better. A lot of coaching is managing your emotions, you know, and I didn't learn this until later in my coaching career. You know, I grew up old school. A lot of my coaches are old school. They get in your face, you know, they could yell, scream, curse, and that was acceptable back then. I think the generation now that we deal with is a little different. And a lot of criticism goes to this generation as far as, well, they want things handed to them and they're a little spoiled. But I think it's the opposite. I think I'm really just amazed about how we could put a game plan together, and I could just show them 1 or 2 times on film, and they can go out and execute at a high level. I think it's just remarkable. I don't know if I could have played in today's era because it just, you have to be so in tune. And so I don't know what's that is accredited to, but I think it's something that I think we should give this generation credit for. But in saying that, as coaches, we have to evolve. We have to become better teachers and how we relate to them.
So you kind of led into my last question, which is, you know, from a perspective of somebody who's either coaching at a lower level and wanting to kind of move up, mm-hmm. or somebody who's interested in becoming a coach, what kind of advice would you give to those people that would help them be more successful?
For one, I think it would be not to be in a hurry to progress up the ladders so fast. I think getting under a coach that is that has a sound grasp on the basics and the fundamentals of coaching and being a good leader. I think that is more important than the X and O's. You know, how you treat people, how you communicate. I think also what's been missing in the sporting profession is that you're essentially given a presentation when you stand in front of a team. You know, how to use your hands, how to use your voice, your tone. No one really talks about this or teaching this. How do you keep 25-year-olds engaged? You know, that's a skill in itself. And I think a lot of coaches are just focused on the X and O's, like I said previously, but it's so much more than that. It's connecting with your audience. And I had to learn these things kind of on my own through trial and error and looking always, you know, I think self-examination is so important as a coach to see, okay, where can I get better? And I had to do this for myself. I've been on probably 7 head coaching interviews, and each time I prior to the interview, I always thought I was ready. I was like, this is it. I know I'm ready. And then after the interview, I realized, well, I have some more growing to do. You know, there's always some areas for growth. And I think that's so important for a coach that you don't become stagnant, you know. And you're just like a player in my eyes. Like, we always preach to the players that you got to get better each day. You got to come in, you got to master the fundamentals and the basics. And it's the same thing as coaching. I think the basics of coaching is, one, knowing your craft. Obviously, you have to be competent at what you do. And I think the next C that I would say was communication. Make sure that you're working on those skills. How do you communicate? How do players learn? And then 3, I always say just compassion. You know, you have to put yourself in the player's shoes. It can't always be work, job, me. You really have to learn how to connect with these players today.
I want to follow up though, because
Sure.
one of the things you talked about was, you know, you've learned things almost the hard way, as you talked about, just trial and error and things like that. Is there anything that you're doing? I mean, I know you're working on your PhD, so we're going to have to call you, I don't know, Coach Dr. Griffin or Dr. Coach Griffin. It's going to get complicated. And I know you're doing that, which is fantastic. Is there anything else that you're doing or you would recommend? Because you haven't really talked about professional development,
Sure.
and it's been more of a trial and error. And I know part of that is because a lot of when you started out and through the years, there hasn't been much, but there seems to be more and more organizations putting forward training. Is that something that people should be doing?
Definitely. And shout out to FSU with the coach and I got my shirt right
How
here.
about that? We're working on
Right?
it. Yeah.
You know, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal what you're doing with the program. I think there should be more venues out there that are offering coaching, just the craft. You know, how do we promote the sport of coaching? It's so important. And like I said, I didn't have this growing up or when I first entered into the coaching profession. And now people have the opportunity to really learn what it really means to be a coach. And I think formal training is one of the best ways. And I wish I had that formal training in the beginning, and I would be so further along. You know, just how do you become a professional? How do, you know, like I said before, how do athletes learn best? You know, you learn this in formal courses. You learn what leadership styles attract the players the best, and what coaching behaviors, you know, how should you behave and conduct yourself as a coach. These are all important, and it has everything to do with coaching success and team success. But, you know, having mentors, I think, is another component of that. You know, I was fortunate to have Tom Thibodeau, Scott Skiles, guys that I really lean on whenever I have an issue or with a player or I don't understand. You know, we're in the finals, like, what should I do? Having that support staff is so important. So the formal education, support staff, and then taking the accountability upon yourself to say, okay, every day I'm going to find a way to get better. If it's reading a magazine, reading a book, if it's picking up the phone and contacting someone. But I'm all for formal, education. That's why I enrolled in the PhD courses myself, is because I want to be better. I want to be a better communicator, better leader overall. And you're going to take these skills, what you learn in these formal courses, and it's going to transcend sports. It's going to exude into everything that you're doing as a leader in your community. So again, I want to say it again. If you can get online, right?
Oh yeah, and we should say thank you for being a board member and really supporting what we're trying to do. It's much appreciated. But I think a key takeaway beyond the formal education, which we've talked about, is important. Is finding that mentor. I think is also a really big one, and I think it's valuable. And then that focus on what am I going to do today to be better at my craft. And I think a lot of people forget that. I'll be better when I'm doing my classwork or coursework. I'll be better when there's a problem, but I'm not going to be better when there isn't a problem.
Right.
And so, even in this situation now where we're in a season where sports aren't happening, the question is, what are the coaches doing to get better for when the season does happen? Or is it, hey, we're not having a season, I'm just going to put my feet up for a few weeks. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and really do appreciate your support of what we're trying to do.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed speaking with you today. You're the best, and I hope the best for you moving forward as well.